words that have become a battleground in America's ongoing struggle with race and opportunity. You think it actually makes racism worse.
We're treating white people wrong for their skin color. People are going to start wondering, did my doctor actually deserve to be here, or are they a doctor because of affirmative action?
DEI is not about quotas. DEI is about programming that help disadvantaged groups.
The Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional. It was such a good program. Why do you think it was deemed unconstitutional? Thank you, Preserve Gold, for sponsoring this timely and important episode of Dr. Phil Primetime, DEI's Impact on America. About 5 years ago, diversity, equity, and inclusion infiltrated the public and private sectors. These were not just academic buzzwords, but a battle cry from the progressive left. Do as we say, or be canceled. Don't question, don't debate, don't resist, don't quote data. Just blindly follow the demands, in the insistence that DEI would cure America's ills. That pursuit of equality of outcome replaced meritocracy. We were no longer rewarding hard work, added value, and talent. Shortly after taking the oath of office, President Trump set a very different course. He signed Executive Order 13985, which reads in part, DEI's infiltration of the federal government ends today. Americans deserve a government committed to serving every person with equal dignity and respect, and to expending precious taxpayer resources only on making America great again. Let me be clear. Tonight's Dr. Phil Primetime isn't about President Trump. It doesn't matter if you love him or hate him. It's about an issue that has divided our country. You know my stance, I don't sugarcoat, but others feel very different than I do. Please watch so that you can decide for yourself. Our first guest tonight, Daniel, says he feels that DEI policies have made him a victim of reverse racism.
I feel like people are getting an unfair advantage because of their skin color. I grew up in a predominantly white area. I come from nothing. I was on free lunch in high school, which is like the lowest. So I got a full ride because I grew up in a single mother household. When I got to college, there was this huge emphasis on race. DEI is just fundamentally wrong. Why should a rich black kid have an advantage over a white kid like me who was on food stamps in high school? I remember I got to my college, and in my very first month, I could not participate in a debate tournament because I was white. White male confidence is simply under attack. I mean, who's committing the most suicides? It's white men. Well, I think a lot of white people are seeing this anti-white sentiment and they're feeling unfair because they look at these universities and they say white people founded these universities, white people founded America, and yet now we're treated like second-class people. And when there's classes called the problem of whiteness, when there's fellowships that ban white students, I think that is a clear sign of one group being treated as beneath another. I went to Twitter, I called out a professor teaching a class called the problem of whiteness, and that led her to call me a cyber terrorist. The New York Times wrote an article and the headline says, "You Chicago, cyberbullying or free speech." And I thought it totally proved my point that white people today cannot even speak up about injustice without being treated like a second-class person. I think the treatment black people received is different because white people are a majority in this country. Black people were always a minority. I think it is different when the majority of the country is treated like a second-class group. I think it's disgraceful. I think if you went to China and you said the problem of Chinese people, they would arrest you. I think if you went to Russia, they would arrest you. And so I'm not saying we should arrest people, but I think we should have some respect for white people because they made America possible.
Daniel, thanks for being here. You feel like this has whipped around and you're paying a price for it.
Absolutely. I was sitting in this room, the kids were saying, yeah, white people are not allowed because, you guys have been winning too much and we need to even the playing field. And I'm looking around and no one is startled, no one is saying, wait a second. And it just startles me how normalized it is, how unapologetic it is. And I'm just worried what's gonna happen in the future. And I don't want to raise any children in a world that simply hates them for being white. I think that's a fair demand, and I hope America can reach a point where we're simply treated for what we add to society and what we bring and for actually being a good person.
Do you agree that we should strive to have equal opportunity for everybody?
Absolutely.
And do you agree that there are members of our society, particularly, I'll start by talking about the Black community, that does not have equal opportunity?
Well, see, I don't really agree with that because under the affirmative action system, which only recently ended in 2022, A black kid who went to boarding school in New Hampshire, whose parents worked on Wall Street, who had every advantage, they would still have an advantage in the system than someone like me who grew up in a single mother household, was low income. And I think that's absolutely ridiculous.
Isn't that the exception and not the rule in the black community? Most black youth don't go to a boarding school in Connecticut. They tend to be overrepresented in the lower socioeconomic strata in America. I mean, that's not an opinion, that's a fact.
I still don't see that as a valid reason to give one group an advantage over another.
That wasn't my question.
Oh, okay.
My question was, do you agree that they may not have equal opportunity as a group?
Yes, absolutely, they have obstacles.
Yeah.
Yes, I would agree with that.
I'm not a fan of DEI. I don't think it helps them. I don't think it helps level the playing field. I think it's the wrong approach to a real problem. I'm just saying, do you acknowledge that the problem exists?
Sure, I do.
You think it actually makes racism worse. Why?
Well, I think it makes racism worse for several reasons. I think, number one, we're treating white people wrong for their skin color. We're treating them differently for their skin color. That is racist in nature. And yet you don't see many people talking about it. And I called it out on my school. A professor called me a cyber terrorist. The New York Times called me a cyber bully. I think that's absurd. I think if a black student called out blatant racism, they would be hailed as a hero. They'd probably receive some awards. Number two, people are gonna start wondering, did my doctor actually deserve to be here, or are they a doctor because of affirmative action? Are my pilots actually meant to be here, or are they here because of a quota? And I think that's gonna clearly lead to racism.
There are a lot of very successful black professionals that say they live under the pale of that, with people questioning them when they say they worked damn hard to get where they were, and people go, oh, well, you know, you got here because you got a free pass.
Of course, yeah.
And they resent that.
I think today, you know, if you're a young white guy growing up in high school, middle school, odds are, you know, you're gonna have a teacher who says white people are evil, you should feel white guilt, you should feel white fragility. And I just worry that's gonna discourage people who are white from pursuing greatness.
Do you think white privilege is real?
Absolutely not today.
Yeah. You don't think it's real today, but you think it's maybe been real in the past?
Sure, historically, yeah.
All right, coming up, a former politician who says today's policies are putting white men to the back of the line. But are they really? We're gonna talk about that and more after the break. Getting quality sleep can be a struggle. Beyond feeling tired, poor sleep affects focus at work, patience with loved ones, and leaves you constantly drained. Finding a solution is key. That's where Beam's Dream Powder comes in. This healthy hot cocoa has completely transformed sleep for many. With flavors like cinnamon cocoa, sea salt caramel, and brownie batter, each serving is only 15 calories and 0 grams of sugar. Guilt-free and effective. Dream's all-natural ingredients help you fall asleep faster, stay asleep longer, and wake up feeling refreshed. It's easy to add to a nighttime routine. Just mix it with hot water or milk before bed. If you want to try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder, get up to 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/Dr. Phil and use code Dr. Phil at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/Dr. Phil and use code Dr. Phil for up to 40% off. Well, my next guest has a PhD in constitutional history and is the former Lieutenant Governor of New York, Dr. Betsy McCoy. You've been listening to Daniel.
Yes.
What do you have to say about what he's saying?
Well, there is a real problem, and just in the last 2 years, you can see that there have been so many lawsuits across the country against Macy's, Disney, against Gannett newspapers, against very large corporations that are setting quotas for how many minorities will occupy seats in management, for example. And once you set a particular number, it's inevitable that managers have to push aside the resumes from some of the young white men in order to meet those quotas. Equity, it sounds like the word equality, but really it's just the opposite. It means using preferences for minorities and women, and the inevitable result is that white men are disadvantaged. They go to the back of the line. I'll just give you 2 examples. The American Rescue Act had 2 provisions in it. The first one provided debt relief for farmers, but only black farmers. White farmers need not apply. I can tell you that the white farmers in northern New York, the dairy farmers, really needed that debt relief, but they were ineligible. Secondly, Restaurant owners were devastated by COVID, so the law provided relief for them, but only for minority restaurant owners and women restaurant owners. Both of these provisions were overturned in federal court because they violate the 14th Amendment, the precious American notion that we're all treated the same.
So let's take a look at equity versus equality. Equality treats people the same. Identical resources, opportunities, regardless of individual needs. Equity adjusts resources and opportunities based on specific needs to achieve fair outcomes for everyone. The key difference is equality is uniform treatment. Equity are fair outcomes by addressing different needs. And this gets into something that's being really subjective, what the people that are administering the program value, if it's race or if it's gender or what, they can just decide, and then they start dispensing things based on trying to create some outcome, correct?
It's very subjective, but as you just pointed out, Dr. Phil, it's not necessarily fair because it's not true that only minority restaurant owners needed help. There were plenty of white male restaurant owners who were in deep trouble during COVID. They had to shut down. They lost their businesses. But they were told just because of the color of their skin, and those white farmers were told just because of the color of their skin, they were ineligible.
And you say the best way to end racial discrimination is to stop discriminating based on race, period, whether it's white, black, whatever.
And I borrowed that from Chief Justice John Roberts.
Here's John Roberts' quote about that. Mm-hmm. The way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. And that means you got to dial that out.
Right. And by the way, I'm very sympathetic to helping young African-American or other minority kids who want to go to college, but don't do it based on their race. Let's have economic affirmative action. Let's make sure the kids who start without any advantages get a leg up based on their circumstances, not their race.
Yeah, I agree with the objective. I disagree with the methodology. Mm-hmm. And so do most of the people that have actually studied this and studied the impact. People want to curry favor with a certain demographic, then they'll beat this drum. But if people want to look at the impact, then it's very clear that this doesn't work. Affirmative action didn't work, mm-hmm. DEI doesn't work. It just doesn't work. If you really want to help this population, then there are other ways to do it, but those programs have not been successful.
And you know, Daniel, you touched my heart because why should you have to feel white guilt? In fact, why should any child ever have to feel guilt? This idea of inherited guilt, what if we told German Americans who live in this country now that they couldn't vote because their ancestors under Hitler did terrible things? Americans don't believe in inherited guilt. We all get a fair chance.
And that's where we need to change what we're doing. Next, is DEI hurting more people than it's helping? And is there even such a thing as Black privilege? We're going to talk to a college professor who says that Daniel is more than just a little misguided. That's after the break. Dr. Susie Denbo is an assistant professor of communications and media management at Fordham University. She says DEI is incredibly important, and while people like Daniel may not understand white privilege, it's still very real.
I don't think that Black privilege is real at all. The fact of the matter is that we live in a world where there are still social inequalities based on race. There's still implicit bias, racial discrimination that often is subconscious. So I'm not saying that people are out there practicing overt racism, but it's built into our institutions. So I just find it hard to believe that Black privilege exists. There are very real social inequalities in the United States, and we don't start at the same baseline. So I do advocate for social programming that helps disadvantaged groups to get a leg up and to be in a better starting position so that they can realize their full potential and so that our society can benefit from the full contributions that they can make. White privilege is real because the world that we live in, there's not equality.
Well, Dr. Denbo, as always, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You've spoken about these sorts of issues in the past, you and I have. Weigh in on what Daniel and Betsy are having to say. I'll give you the floor first.
Okay, thanks. I would like to address Daniel. You're having a reaction to some experiences that you had that maybe I feel like contradicted what you thought you might experience when you got to college. I don't want to put words into your mouth. I would encourage you to dive in a little bit more to exploring your own identity and how you are positioned in the world, and to think more about white privilege, because white privilege is a really difficult concept to get, especially if you identify as white. It is not difficult for other racial identities to get it. This set of advantages that white people who identify as white, I am one, that we sort of are imbued with based solely on our identity as white. These advantages prevent us from experiencing everyday injustices. These are things that we didn't earn. We didn't work really hard to get these benefits. We don't deserve them because we're so amazing. They 100% are just things, the advantages that we have in our lives based solely on the fact that we identify as white. So it really does require a great deal of reflection and self-awareness to kind of step outside of our own lived experience and compare and contrast that experience with other individuals. An opportunity I think that most universities try to present to students. I feel like that's one of our jobs. I'll give an example. I could be up here on stage and say something really wacky, and people in the audience or at home might say, wow, that Dr. Susie is super wacky. Like, what's wrong with her? Now, a Black female scholar could be up here and say something that they might think is wacky. And chances are a lot of the audience will walk away, not intentionally, but walk away saying, wow, Black women are wacky. And that just simply doesn't happen.
I'd like to say this is preposterous.
Yeah, I agree.
We need to look at people as individuals, and I don't look at a person's skin when I hear them talking. I admire Clarence Thomas. I admire Thomas Sowell. Those Black scholars, Black justices have said amazing things, and when they speak, I don't say, listen to that Black person talking. I value the words and the values that they express. So it could be that this notion of white privilege is concocted, very useful, but really unjustified.
Well, let me ask you something. Do you believe that DEI is a good concept?
I do believe that DEI is a good concept, and I want to make it clear to everyone that DEI is not about quotas. DEI is about initiatives and programming that help disadvantaged groups to have access to resources that for whatever reason maybe they didn't have access to.
That might be in theory, but is that the way it's actually practiced in the real world? And if it's a good program, then why is the empirical data so negative on DEI? Because the data doesn't support that it's working.
I have had workplace experiences where it was administered very well. It is targeting individuals that have, for a variety of reasons, might have not been able to start out on that level.
Well, it begins with how you define diversity, though, doesn't it? It has nothing to do with just the color of the skin. Because you can have minorities there that come from very similar backgrounds as their white counterparts. That's not diversity at all. Diversity has to deal with background and cultural differences and all sorts of things, but that's not what is done. What's done oftentimes is based on the color of the skin. It's like, okay, if we're going to hit our quotas, if we're going to do the things we need to maintain funding, if we're going to do the things we need to do to get where we're going, we need to have a certain head count. And you know that's true. It certainly was until the Supreme Court said it could no longer be used in the academic setting.
We do agree on something. We agree that diversity is more than just racial identity, 100%.
One other thing we can agree on is the Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional and could not be used in the academic setting. If it was such a good program, why do you think it was deemed unconstitutional?
I'm not going to speak to the legality of it. I didn't agree with that decision, but I've worked in admissions offices at universities, and 100% is not a quota. It's looking at the whole picture, making sure that students meet baseline requirements of things that are important academically, but also looking at their whole identity, their life experiences, which can include their racial identity for sure, including socioeconomic status, including first-generation college students. So I don't agree really with the DEI programming doesn't work.
Do you acknowledge that companies across the board that have these DEI programs forced on them actually go the other way in subsequent years and hire fewer people of diversity than they did before these programs were forced on them?
I find that most organizations actually are okay with DEI programming, and whether or not it gets called DEI programming, they are still going to be doing it. And they're still going to be targeting a diverse workforce because that benefits organizations in the long run, whether you call it DEI or something else.
In a really large study, the change over 5 years is those who have mandatory diversity training even tend to hire 9.2% fewer Black women than they did before they had to go through diversity training. Those that have to do job testing hire 10.2% and 9.2% less Black men and women. And those who have grievance systems hire 7.3 and 4.8% less Black candidates. So they rebel against this because they don't like it being forced on them.
I mean, obviously, I'm not going to dispute this. And I am in agreement and have been from the beginning that we can revisit the way DEI programming gets accomplished. Mandatory training of any kind in an organizational context rarely makes anyone on board with an idea. But I still adhere to the fact that targeting a diverse workforce is important and beneficial.
Depends on how you define diversity. $36 trillion. That is the U.S. debt, and it gets deeper and deeper by the day. Our debt has never been higher, nor have the stakes. The government is looking to slash the federal budget by $2 trillion, and no one knows what that will mean for your job, savings, and future. I've seen a lot in my time, and there's one thing I know for sure. You need to prepare before it's too late. I trust Preserve Gold to help protect my wealth, and I strongly urge you to do the same. They are the only precious metals firm I trust and recommend to my family, friends, and audience, and they have a special offer just for you. Text Dr. Phil to 50505 to get your free precious metals guide from Preserve Gold. With gold prices recently breaking records and analysts predicting this trend to continue throughout 2025, you cannot afford to wait. As a bonus, you can get up to $15,000 with a qualified purchase from Preserve Gold. So don't wait. Text Dr. Phil to 50505 today.
I'm very concerned when a young man graduates from school, high school even, or college, and goes for a job, and he's told, you know, you have all the qualifications, we'd love to hire you, but we've got this quota for minorities, and we can't hire you. Even we women, we have brothers, we have sons and grandsons and husbands, and we don't want them to come home and say, well, you know, I could have gotten that job or that promotion, but they said they needed more minorities in the job. When are we going to just treat people as individuals?
I am not advocating for a quota system. When a DEI is done well, it should not be a quota system. So we are in agreement.
What should it be?
It should be looking holistically at making sure that you meet those baseline requirements, right, for any kind of position. But for instance, when you're recruiting people for a position, it's not necessarily relying on your same networks and going to, you know, the same sorts of organizations or recruitment pools that you would always go to. It's casting a wider net.
I agree with you on that.
See, I know, that's a smart way to do business. But doing that can also help you to realize a more diverse workforce. But you're still going to be hiring people that meet whatever those qualifications are that you need, the technical skill set that you need to get a job done, or the qualifications that are required. But to get a diverse workforce, you really do need to, like I said, cast a wider net in terms of recruiting, create programming internally where you're having people mentoring each other that maybe don't look exactly like them. Those kinds of initiatives have proven to work.
But they still have to meet the criteria. You don't want...
No, I don't think anybody wants people to be hired that aren't qualified for a job.
Oh, but here's the problem. If you have these schools that are pressured to do minority admissions, there is often a mismatch of qualifications with expectations. And that leads to higher dropout rates, fewer graduation rates, and fewer successes in the professions. And those are empirical findings. You have to have read that research.
Yeah. And I guess what I would ask you to consider is, if we are interested in having a more diverse workforce, what a lot of institutions in higher education will do is go back and look at those qualifications and how can we make sure that we're targeting students. It's just, you might have to rethink some of the qualifications.
Can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm sitting and I'm hearing you out, and I think you are right on some things, and I think you are very smart. My whole point is, why do white people need to feel guilt?
Nobody can make somebody feel guilt. That's a choice. That's a choice that you have. You're choosing to respond. We're being asked as white people to identify our racial identity and to consider it in ways that we have never been asked before. And I find that refreshing, and it can be scary, and it can make you uncomfortable, but I think it's an important thing to do if we're going to be committed to social change and to equality.
Next, a professor and author who says it doesn't matter how you got into school, whether it was through affirmative action or your dad's name on a building. Everyone takes the same test to get out, no matter how you got in. We'll hear from him after the break. My next guest, Dr. Dibinga, is a senior professional lecturer with focus on peace, human rights, and cultural relations at American University, D.C., and the author of Lies About Black People: How to Combat Racist Stereotypes and Why It Matters. Now, he could not disagree more with Daniel and Betsy.
I guess we can't teach why Native Americans shed tears on that trail. I guess we can't teach why Japanese Americans were interned in those camps and jailed. I guess we can't teach why Jews fleeing the Holocaust came to America and were forced to reverse sail. I guess we can't teach about those who had their rights stalled at Stonewall as they cried and wailed. Too many in America caught up in ignorance and denial. They'd rather have you forget history to learn about its tribulations and trials. They'd rather not teach you the history so white folks don't feel guilty. They think white kids will only see themselves as evil and filthy. But I digress, because my faith in white students is stronger than yours. I know they can handle full history and all of its flaws. They can learn the evils of some white people because those evils were defeated. And when we teach them the history, they're inspired to never repeat it. I know that white kids aged 16 to 19 can handle 16-19, even white kids in elementary and preteens, because too many students get angry when they find out the truth about America's complete history that wasn't taught in their youth.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here tonight. Now,
It's an honor.
From your own personal experience, can you tell us why you think DEI is so important and works?
Well, the great activist Julian Bond said that you take the word America and you flip the letters around, you can spell out the term I am race. There's nothing that has happened in America that race has not been a part of. Whether we're talking about housing, whether we're talking about jobs, whether we're talking about corporate access, whether we're talking about the healthcare system, which Dr. King said was probably the most racist aspect of American society, everything has been based on race. If you go back into the day and you look at other groups of diverse backgrounds, we used to use very ignorant terms like yellow to describe Asian people, red to describe Native American people. Over the years, we flipped that, started talking about Asian American and Native Americans, indigenous people. But if you notice, we kept white and black. Because the problem with whiteness is that whiteness is an idea. It's not about white people, it's about the idea of whiteness, just as the idea of blackness is a problem. And so we kept those on the books. We changed categories of whiteness over the years in order to expand whiteness. And so we have to understand that this country has always been about the complexion of connection, and it has always served to deny people opportunities based on their race. And so diversity is about what Dr. King said. He said it's about true integration is about the inclusion of power, resources, and responsibility. So it's not just about the numbers you have in your organization, it's about what's the power that they have. And that's why DEI programs work. I see that at the corporations that I speak at. I see it at the schools that I speak at. I see it at the government groups that I speak at. And this idea that...
But how did they get there? They didn't get there through a DEI program, and they don't define diversity based on skin color.
I would disagree with that. Diversity is not just about race. There's diversity of thought, there's religion, class, physical ability, which is the largest quote-unquote minority group in this country is the disabled population, who's also not represented on many of the campuses that I go to. But we get stuck on this concept of race because it has this fundamental beef between white and black. And people ultimately don't want to give up whiteness. That's what it really comes down to.
Let me ask you a question. This is an observation that Thomas Sowell made that I'm just curious if you agree with, that the free market provides a clear incentive not to discriminate according to race.
Mm-hmm.
This market isn't free.
That's not what I asked you.
I disagree with what he said. I would agree if you actually had a free market, which we do not in the United States. Mm-hmm. Because free means everybody has access to it. Everybody has access to the same resources. We live in a society where we fund our schools based off of taxpayers' dollars. So the poorest schools get the poorest resources, the richer schools get the best resources. What's free about that? We continue to create a cycle of poverty.
But his point is that if you're racist and you hire whites that are not as productive, intelligent, and sharp because you don't want to hire a black candidate who is smart, mm-hmm. sharp, productive, in the long run, they're not going to be competitive, mm-hmm. and they're going to lose out.
But is that not the history of America? I mean, this was a country that at one point had a sign saying no blacks or Irish need apply because Irish people were not considered part of whiteness, right? And so look at Wall Street. I mean, there's a history of people only choosing to employ white people. And that's why in a society that's browning, in a world that's becoming smaller, the ability to compete is not there. And so my thing is for people who feel threatened because they've always had access to everything from black women's bodies to the companies and the organizations and the places that they lived and occupied, equality is going to look like oppression.
Mm-hmm. All right. I have to take the opportunity for a break. This is an equal opportunity break. We'll be right back. I'm very pragmatic about these things. I don't think DEI works. I don't think it matters how anybody feels about it. Statistically, based on empirical data and research, it doesn't work. We can't create equality of outcome. The problem is when you put DEI aside, then you're counting on creating equal opportunity for everyone, and that's the problem. There's not equal opportunity for everyone. We have so many overrepresented in the black community that are starting way behind because the tax base in the areas that so many live is much lower. And so the schools just simply don't have the money to resource the classrooms, to even keep the buildings up, to even keep the windows with glass in them sometimes. So you're not preparing those students. It's hard to get teachers to want to work in those areas. Mm-hmm. So they don't have the opportunity. And what I'm saying is you can make a huge dent in this in one generation if you will go into those areas and fund those schools, get the teachers into those areas, and give those kids the opportunity to get the base that they need academically so they have the same opportunity that every other kid has. And I think if you do that, in one generation, you can make a huge dent in leveling the playing field. But there's got to be one other aspect to it, is you've got to get to the parents who came from a generation before and get them to value and support education as well. So it means that we also have to deal with the home situation and make sure that they have Wi-Fi, that they have the computers there, that they have parents that are oriented to supporting the academic endeavors. But if focus and emphasis is put on that, you can go a long way to getting those young people prepared to be competitive in those environments. And I'm not saying it's the whole solution, but I think it would go a long way to giving those kids the opportunities that they deserve and level the playing field.
And we can all agree on that.
Dwight, John, and Nicole, I want to thank you for being here. Now, Dwight, You've been listening to everything that we've been talking about here, and you have interesting real-world empirical evidence of how the system is set up against Black candidates. And I think it is one of the clearest examples of how the system is set up to favor white versus Black. Tell us what happened and how it finally resolved itself.
Well, thank you for having me on your show, Dr. Phil. I applied at Shinola, Detroit. Me and my friends love the brand. I always wanted to work there. And literally application after application, I sent in up to 20 applications from January to April. And I never got a call back as the White Jackson once. I just kept getting automatic emails saying, unfortunately, moving on with other candidates. I'm like, well, that's weird because I also have plenty of experience inside the hospitality industry. So I changed my name to John Jabrowski, and literally in the same week, I ended up getting a call back on that following Friday as John to come in the next for two positions.
So you go 20-0 as Dwight Jackson, and then you change it one time to John Jabrowski, and you get a call back. So how did they react when you show up?
When I showed up, it wasn't pretty obvious, like, oh, you don't look like John. It was kind of very innuendo, kind of like you just had to pick up the energy of like the distance and the long pauses they were having as asking me questions like, do you have more to say about yourself? So it was, the first interview was very awkward. It's very weird. They had me see many people, many managers, and didn't get any job I had an interview at. And if you see more than 2 or 3 managers in the same day, you most likely got the job. But they would kind of try to investigate necessarily. In the second interview, I introduced myself as Dwight Jackson because I want to work here. I have the skills, the same skill set as John Jabrowski. So I'm going to introduce myself as who I am, as you guys should have knew me as. And they didn't question anything.
John, Nicole, tell me what Dwight is suing for. What's the cause of action, and how's this likely to go?
Yeah, Dr. Phil. So it's a race discrimination case, and these cases are really hard to prove, right? What started at the equality here, we're not even getting to equity like you're talking about earlier. He's just looking for a fair shake here, not a handout from the hotel. These cases are extremely rare and difficult. I've done these my whole career. Never do you have the evidence like this. They're very, very difficult because you can't prove it. This case, we have a smoking gun and it's 20 applications that were denied. And then suddenly he's getting multiple interviews in the same week. I think he has a slam dunk case against the hotel because we have the evidence, which is really rare. I've had a few reverse discrimination cases, but they're very rare. Most of the time when we deal with these cases, it's people like Dwight.
Wow. Nicole, do you think this case is something that you can get to a jury with?
Yes, Dr. I have no doubt. And honestly, since this initial filing of the complaint in this case, it's honestly just grown stronger and stronger every single day. We have added other parties to the matter as well, other plaintiffs, and I have no doubt at all that this case will get to a jury and would be successful.
Yeah, I'd hate to be on the other side of this one. Yeah. So you guys will keep us posted on how this goes, please?
Absolutely, Dr. Phil.
We'll be right back. Well, gold has been in the headlines for the past few months, hitting record high after record high last fall. The Daniel Boston, founder of Preserve Gold, joins me in explaining the value of gold in today's economy. Now, first off, Daniel, I want to thank you. Not only do I purchase my precious metals from Preserve Gold, but you provide such a service educating people about investing in gold. And as we enter 2025, what is your outlook for physical gold and silver?
We're extremely optimistic. I mean, if you just look at what central banks are doing right now, I think it's a very telling sign in terms of where we think prices are going. If you go back to the 1980s, when we had the last bout of inflation, central banks were buying gold at record levels, and we saw the price of gold go up 5 times from the time they started buying. today, it's not just the US central bank that's buying gold, it's central banks around the world. And so with the way that we've seen the value of the dollar decline since 2020, the dollar's down 25%, and gold's gone up 60% over that period. We've done nothing since that point except amass record amounts of debt. So I think gold prices are poised to shine through 2025 and beyond.
All right, so the dollar's down 25%, gold's up 60%. That's an 85% gap.
It is.
That's a good place to be if you're buying gold.
It's a great place to be.
And what could this mean for Americans, especially those that are preparing for retirement? If that dollar is shrinking, their buying power with that money that they've saved all this time is going down, down, down. If they put it into gold, then that can reverse that trend and it can go up. It seems to me like that could be a pretty good safeguard for people.
That's absolutely right. Gold is simply a direct measure of strength or weakness against the US dollar. Gold cannot be printed. You can't produce it out of thin air. It's been used as a currency hedge for thousands of years. You know, what I always tell people is you cannot buy fire insurance on the house after the house is already on fire. That's really relevant for me, especially, being in Los Angeles. I can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. If the stock markets were to crash, if I'm sitting in a portfolio full of stocks and bonds, I'm going to be at the mercy of that. If I'm sitting in cash and the value of the dollar declines, then I'm at the mercy of that. So if I want to retake control of my wealth, I need to hold something tangible, something that cannot be printed. It's not at any whim of any government, central bank, or anything along those lines.
If people are interested in investing with preserved gold, how do they get started? So you got somebody over here, they've got money in a retirement account, they've got money in a savings account, they got money in their mattress, whatever. How do they do it? How do they get started?
Yeah, we work with people from all ranges. Whether you've been doing this for a long time or this is your first time, you can give us a call at our toll-free number, 877-444-0923. One of our precious metals experts will really take the time with you to really ascertain and understand what are your goals, both short-term, long-term. And then based on that, we can provide some recommendations. Look, at the end of the day, this may not be the right investment for you, or it may be the right choice for you, but we're here to provide the information so you can land in a place where you can make the most informed decision for yourself.
Tell them the number one more time.
877-444-0923. You can text Phil to 50505, or you can check out our website, www.preservegold.com.
All right. No way you can miss it. Daniel, thank you so much.
Thanks, Phil.
All right.